Hello and welcome to the Groupthink Podcast. Joining me is a glass of oak leaf sweet red, and adjacent to him, to this glass, is Jacob Airey. Jacob Airey is a social media guy over at DailyWire. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Sure thing. Tell us a little bit what you do exactly. I know you're involved kind of in the DailyWire clique, as it were.
So I'm a social media coordinator, so I handle clicks, some stuff in Facebook, YouTube, that kind of thing. I'm also a writer. I write a weekly article. I used to write for a website called Conservative News, but that was before the Daily Wire scooped me up, and Conservative News is RIP. But yeah, that's pretty much what I do. Just handle a lot of Facebook, YouTube type stuff.
So are you the resident meme lord at the Daily Wire who's responsible for this?
That is not me. The person who is the meme lord, he actually works off-site, so I've only caught like glimpses of him every once in a while. He's kind of like a legend, you know.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. I just love this mystique vision of like some guy rolling up with like a truck of memes, just smuggling him in like yellow manila envelopes into the Daily Wire and be like, "This is the good stuff. This is right here." But
well, there's a rumor. There's a guy who always pops in who's like dressed kind of like a janitor, and people are like, "Wait, is that the meme guy? Could that be him?" And it's like kind of an urban legend and whatnot.
Oh man,
I'm half joking. I'm using hyperbole, but yeah, it's kind of funny. It's we rarely see our meme master, as we call him.
He's amazing. Just the kind of stuff you guys pull off, or he specifically pulls off on the Daily Wire page, is wonderful.
It's true. He's a true meme genius, no question.
Yes. Speaking of meme genius, what is it like working in the office of the most memeable person on the right at the moment?
It's actually not so bad. It's everyone has this picture of Ben that it's always constantly high energy, get things done, and that's true for the most part. But I feel like at times we're just kind of like a regular office. I mean, it's kind of like, hey Sally, can you print me out this paper? I can't get the printer to work today. You know, that a lot of that goes on at the Daily Wire.
You make it sound so mundane when it's like I can only imagine lethargic Ben.
Well, he is many things. Lethargic is not one of them. So
I was gonna say, you heard it here first, folks. Like Alex Jones, Ben Shapiro is a performance. That would be the news of the century right there. But so you're also kind of part of the nascent conservative film blogosphere. Tell us a little about what you're doing there.
Well, I've kind of got this reputation of being a contrarian with my movie reviews because I tend to like films that conservatives don't like, but for odd reasons. So there's this big debate over which is kind of a weird debate to me, but in the specifically the conservative movie blogger, there's this everyone seems to like Zack Snyder, and I'm like the only conservative on earth who doesn't like Zack Snyder. I think he's a hack. The only movie I liked was 300. Oh, I guess The Legends of the Guardians was okay, but it's kind of like I did not like Watchmen. Man of Steel was passable, but only because of Henry Cavill. His talent alone saved that film. Batman vs Superman, I thought was a terrible take on The Dark Knight. The Justice League, of course, had to be put on life support from Joss Whedon. He had to fix that film, and there's this whole... I actually kind of teased David French, because he's a big release the Zack Snyder cut guy, so I kind of teased him about that today. So I've kind of developed that sort of contrarian attitude. I'm a big supporter of the MCU. I was not a part of there was this thing called that was going on called the Alita Battle Angel Challenge, where conservatives were all going to see Alita and not Captain Marvel. I'm like, let's just go see both. You know, that was kind of my
make your own opinions, man.
Yeah, exactly. So I actually got into a fight with another movie blogger, and I was saying we haven't even seen Battle of the Angel. For all we know, that it's even worse SJW than the stuff Brie Larson is saying right now. You know, what Brie Larson says in the press is not what the movie is. We found that out with Black Panther. So everyone just take a chill pill and relax. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm big time screamer of don't trust Rotten Tomatoes. I think Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, exactly. So, but that's kind of where I am. I try to review a movie at least once a week, even if I do have to do a movie from the past. So I do what's called movie review flashbacks, where I do like movies like Quiz Show from the 90s and stuff like that. I do classic film reviews, which I'm surprised isn't more controversial, because it's kind of a take on old films from a millennial perspective. So I'm working on a very controversial take on Lawrence of Arabia. So I'm waiting to. I'm still working on that one. That's like a 10-hour movie. So I'm trying to work out all the kinks out of that one, so I can just put my argument where I can blow everyone's mind.
I mean, when it comes to like millennial film reviews, the two things I always notice that tend to be different are that the movies are not they're not made for the taste of millennials, so they're much slower, and also millennials tend to miss a lot of the ongoing historical context from what's going on when those movies came out. So everyone.
And I agree with that perspective for sure.
So I was talking, I think it was my father who was on a show I was working on, and I mentioned offhand that the 70s films were a lot of like dour police dramas and stuff like that, and he immediately turned to me because he grew up he was a 10-year-old at the time, and he was like, it was mostly like disaster movies at the time, and I'm like, I didn't know that, I wasn't there. I'm not so much for the expert, but I was gonna say, where are you on the whole? I should probably mention the David French enigma, where he somehow manages to have the single most contrarian stance on every single movie that comes out, no matter what.
Well, I actually agreed with him on Aquaman. I thought his take on Aquaman was very good, but I feel like there's this, and I've said this before, there's this, with conservatives specifically, there's kind of like this longing for a golden age of Hollywood, and but but when you say, okay, well, what kind of films are you talking about, they name The Godfather and Citizen Kane, and maybe a handful of others, but it's kind of like...
Those are not traditional Hollywood.
Well, right, and that's my whole point, is I don't actually think there was a golden age of Hollywood. I think there's always been bad movies, there's always been good movies, and it's kind of funny because, like, my parents are really young. My mom and dad are Gen X. So if you talk to my dad, Roger Moore is the best James Bond. He likes Sean Connery. He thinks Sean Connery is second best, but he is Roger Moore all the way. And so it's... and then I guess no one really has a thing for George Lazenby and Tim Dalton, but it's, you kind of look at the generation. Everyone says my Bond was best, my Batman was best. Personally, I think my Batman was the best. Christian Bale, actually Kevin Conroy, he's the best Batman. But it's I said this to my fellow Daily Wire writer Paul Blah, and he goes, oh, you fanboys are all the same, naming Kevin Conroy, and I said, hey, you gotta admit, Mask of the Phantasm was not just a good movie, it was a great movie. And he kind of paused for a minute and he goes, actually, that was a pretty great film. So, it's kind of funny. There's always these, and I think that conservatives, even millennial conservatives, I got into an argument with a young con recently about this. They have like this idea that any movie before 1990 is the gold standard for filmmaking, and I just don't believe that's the case. I think that movies have always gone through phases, they've always gone through trends, and that's kind of my. I don't want to call out David French specifically because it's not just a David French thing. It's it's Sonny Bunch, it's Kyle Smith, it's pretty
it's the whole National Review phenomenon. They just have the weirdest film critics.
Yeah, it's true, but like I said, I don't want to. David French had a really great review of Aquaman, and he basically said what I said. So I don't want to pile on him specifically, because I don't think it's a David French issue. I just think it's this conservative kind of longing for the past, and it's just the past had problems too. We didn't have CGI back then, so it's like, we didn't have colored movies for a while. We didn't have talkies for a while. It's kind of like we got to see each movie in the context of what it is, because as much as people, and this is a controversial thing I've said before, is the entertainment industry is an entertainment industry. Or I should say, it is an industry. So that means it has customers it has to please, and that's just the fact of it. Whether it's art or not, I believe films are art, but it's an industry, and an industry means you're selling a product.
Sure, and we don't have to specifically dogpile on David French. Let's dogpile on your boss instead. What is this? Have you aired this by Andrew Klavan by chance?
Well, he had me on to talk about specifically the MCU. And I actually think that conversation was really well. He heard my perspective. He didn't, after I went off air, he didn't go back and bash me. I thought it was a very fair debate. He asked me some really good questions that I didn't think that I had to think about, and which is good. And so I have said this to Klavan, but again, I feel like Klavan though has a different perspective because he's actually been in the film industry, and so I have a great respect for him because he's actually written award-winning films. He's actually been in there. So I'll debate the merits of the MCU with Klavan all the livelong day. But I feel like Klavan has actually done the hard work, and that's an important thing. He is a hard worker. He comes in every day, does a great job with this podcast. So I would just say, even though I disagree with him about the film industry, I still think that his perspective is a little unique because he doesn't have that. I don't want to say hoity-toity. Okay, I will. He doesn't have like a hoity-toity take of I'm cultured, so my perspective on movies is boss. He has a perspective of, hey, I've worked in the industry and I know what it takes to make a film, and I think that's a very different take. And so I actually love talking movies with him because we actually found we have some common ground on films, believe it or not. So. I
also sense he doesn't have that much antipathy towards like genre films. He doesn't seem like he's super pretentious about it, where he will seem to give movies that deserve it their due. I think he was responsible for the Dark Knight as metaphor for George Bush analysis from back in the day. Have you ever read that?
I read it when it first came out, but it's been a while. I'm not sure if I think that is not a bad perspective. The only difference is President Bush being the government and Batman being an independent person or a citizen of the state as opposed to running the state. That would be the only differentiation I would make. But I can kind of see that perspective because Nolan, he's probably the best director of our time right now, and so he has a way of layering films but not making them so deep that a person who, like me, who's just a regular moviegoer, I can go to his films and enjoy them. Even Interstellar, which I think is his worst film, I still think it's a good film, and I can still enjoy it, even though it kind of makes me it kind of makes me scratch my head at the end. But I can still enjoy it for what it is, a good sci-fi thriller.
Yeah, I meant that more specifically in terms of like his willingness to engage with genre films, because I know there's a lot of especially older film critics that just do not get anything that has more audience focus. Like, I read a lot of Jonathan Rosenbaum. Yeah, I don't know if you've ever read him at all, but he's one of the old highty-tighty Chicago Reader critics, and he's an absolutely amazing writer who can tell you like the intricacies of Tarkovsky and Bergman, but he just doesn't he sees like nothing in like a modern action movie really. Not that I think he necessarily thinks that they're lesser, just that he doesn't get anything out of them. Whereas I think Klavan's slightly more in touch than a lot of people, especially because I know a lot of people, especially from that generation, they fall in love with film when it's westerns, and then they wind up watching Turner Classic Movies on a loop when they reach a certain age.
Oh, no, like you said, I think Clavin isn't at that point. I think a lot of the films that he reviews, he has a good perspective on. And in fact, one of my favorite films is Sunset Boulevard, and I watched that film because I listened to his podcast. This is before I worked at the Daily Wire.
He has too much of a predilection for sex and violence to ever give up on modern film.
Well, yeah, he says that openly, right? You know.
So tell me about what got your blog going and where you're going with that.
Well, originally I started it, I'll be honest, when I first started it was kind of just a vanity project. I just thought, and one of the reasons was there was this movie website that did reviews from a Christian perspective, but I thought it was and when it first started, they had really good reviews, very nuanced reviews. My dad contributed one of the reviews to them. I won't tell you what film it escapes me, but it was a boxing related film. And but then over time, it changed into kind of this puritanical Victorian Christianese kind of spot. Because I wrote a review for I used to contribute to them, and I wrote a review for a movie that Jason Statham was in, and I basically said it's a good movie, but it's got a lot of violence and foul language. Just it's not a kids movie. Don't take your kids to see it. And I made and it was a film where he played a thief, and I made a point to say this movie kind of glamorizes being a thief, so just bear that in mind. They actually edited the last paragraph of my film and sermonized it and added scripture verses and stuff to it, and then put a disclaimer, Christian Spotlight does not endorse this film, because I still thought it was a really good action film, even with those problems, and so that kind of made me mad, and I thought, you know what, I can write better reviews than this. If they're going to editorialize my review, then I want to, because it says very plainly we don't editorialize, and then they turn around. I think since they've changed it, because probably people were complaining, but so that's where I started. The first movie I reviewed, I believe, was Batman Year One, which is an animated film.
I've seen that.
And yeah, it's a good film. They focus a little too much on Gordon for my taste. I don't think I said that in my review. I've since rewatched it. But when it first came out, I think I reviewed the first Amazing Spider-Man and so on and so forth, and that's kind of where it got kicked off from there. And then I started, before it was a once-a-week thing, then it was twice a week, and then it went back to once a week, then it was once every 2 weeks, and then I started doing it daily, and that was a little bit of a project, but I'm glad I went back to the daily because it really challenges me to put out my own content. So that's kind of where I'm at. I just kind of got sick of reading other people's reviews that were... I don't want to. I'm trying to think of a good way to describe it. I just got kind of sick of minutia, where every review has to be bogged down in something philosophical. If it's a philosophical movie, then we should say it. But if it's Fast and Furious, we don't need to have a philosophical debate about it. Are there fast cars? Is there a lot of action? That's what makes those movies entertaining, and that's what we need to talk about. So that's kind of where I came from as far as starting the blog, and I started doing movie reviews. I used to do book reviews. I don't anymore now that I'm a published author. So now I do just reading recommendations, basically. This is what I'm reading this week. Check it out, if it's good. And so, but I feel like since now I'm a published author, I shouldn't be reviewing my competitors. That's kind of a bad idea. So, but yeah, I used to do those, and every once in a while I'll do like a little devotional or whatnot, just to fill time and space. But yeah, that's kind of where I came off. I just wanted to promote the films that I like, and even promote the ones I don't like. If I don't like a film, I want people to know why and whatnot. So yeah, that's kind of where I got where I was coming from and when I got started. I think in July 2012, I think, was when I launched it.
That was when Amazing Spider-Man came out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Batman Year One came out around the same time. So, but yeah, that's when it kicked off.
I feel lucky that I still have two very good editors that don't force me to rewrite my stuff constantly, which is good because I like to take very controversial stances. I managed to convince the lead editor of Geeks Under Grace to let me write an article about the Last Temptation of Christ, which 10 years ago, maybe, that probably would never have ever happened at a Christian website, considering just what that movie is. But so far, they've given me a lot of editorial freedom, which I appreciate a lot. I mean, I think the only time they've ever asked me to go back and change the actual content of something was when I reviewed Gosnell, and they just said, Tyler, you sounded a little bit too mean. Go back and add something nice. Which apparently I was one of the few the few conservatives who wasn't entirely on that. Although I won't ask you to say anything because your boss is involved in it. So.
Well, I did review Gosnell. I won't reiterate what I said because I'll get it wrong. But I actually did review Gosnell for the DailyWire. So you can go back and just Google Gosnell DailyWire and it comes up. So if anyone wants to, but I actually talked to Clavin. I said, "Will it hurt your feelings if I review this film and I don't like it?" And he said, "No, go for it." And whatnot. So, but yeah. So actually, the only time I've gotten a little pushback was I reviewed The Shack, and I gave it a positive review. And a lot of people are shocked by this because even Christian websites have said how terrible the movie is. I thought it was a good film. I said that. I thought, what's his name? The guy who plays the main character. I thought he delivered a good performance. I think he was the only one who delivered like what I would consider like a great performance. So that everyone else was just kind of average. But Sam Worthington, I thought he delivered a great performance, and to this day, I have not lived that down. The funny thing is that was actually my first article for the Daily Wire, so that's what's even funnier. So if you go back far enough in the archives, you can find my review of The Shack. So Michael Knowles still has not let me live that down. Every once in a while, it'll pop up in conversation. So, but yeah.
I can imagine his grudges last eternally, so... I did want to bring up... I kind of love just controversial takes on movies in general, because if there's anything that bothers me, it's listening to a hive mind of people agree fastidiously about something I don't agree about. So, but, I mean, obviously, I harbor my own share of controversial opinions. I had Kyle Mann, the lead writer of Babylon Bee, on, I think, last week, and... Apparently we talk on Twitter occasionally, and he got the sense that I'm some sort of immense movie snob based on the fact that I'm just constantly sharing like these random weird like offbeat movies. Like I shared the guy who made The Lives of Others made another movie that came out this year, and I shared that, and he's like, "Man, that looks cool," and I'm just sitting here like, "Oh, I know, right? 5 hours of German art. I'm all for it." But apparently I'm afraid I might be developing that kind of reputation, which I don't know how I feel about that quite yet. But obviously, I'm prone to controversial opinions, as the Last Jedi poster in the background proves. So
yeah, and see, I actually hated The Last Jedi. But in my humble defense, I actually don't like Rian Johnson. I thought Looper was a terrible movie. I thought that comedy film he made. Now I've never seen Brick. But that comedy film he made, I can't think. It also has Joseph Gordon-Levitt in it.
Something, I don't know.
Yeah, the Brothers Bloom or something like that.
Yeah.
I thought that movie was stupid. I didn't laugh once. I wanted my minutes back. Looper I didn't like because the plot has so many holes in it and unanswered questions, and his answer is just to kill off the main character, and I think that's very unimaginative. Spoiler alert for those who haven't seen Looper, I apologize. But it doesn't matter. Don't waste your time. But I felt the same way about The Last Jedi. I thought this is my thing with my gripe with Rian Johnson, Zack Snyder, and Darren Aronofsky is they make films that have pseudo-intellectual values. They wrap them up in special effects and really good visual effects, and then they go here. But there's no emphasis on storytelling and character development, and so it's kind of like getting a really beautifully wrapped Christmas present, opening it, and it's a pile of plain white socks. And there's actually a really great scene in Saving Mr. Banks where the writer of Mary Poppins is having an argument with Walt Disney about the movie script for it's based on I think the first 3 books in her series. And so she picks up the script and she goes, this is your script. And she throws it out the window. And of course, all the papers rain down slowly. And she goes, it has no weight. And that's kind of how I feel about Snyder, Johnson, and Aronofsky is I feel like their scripts they're wrapped up in pseudo intellectualism, so you think it's weighty, but when you push through the minutia, I don't really see the value in their films. That's just my opinion. Like I said, I'm a contrarian. And I actually revel in being a contrarian. In fact, when I agree with people, I get uncomfortable. I'm like, oh man, maybe I should revisit that. Maybe I should revisit that movie I liked. Everyone else likes it. Maybe I should reevaluate that opinion. So, and I know saying this about Aronofsky is probably the most controversial, because Rian Johnson and Zack Snyder have always kind of had like this divide of their fans and their non-fans. But Aronofsky, he's kind of like Nolan is. You're just supposed to respect his films because he's a serious filmmaker, and it's so serious his wife left him while he was making Mother. So I wouldn't say. Yeah, I know, right? I think wasn't Jennifer Lawrence. Wasn't he married to her at the time?
I thought they were dating or something like that.
Yeah, they were. It's like she broke up with him while he was making Mother, while she was starring in it, because he was so obsessed with this film that ended up being a dud. But anyway, so that's just my take on. There are other filmmakers I feel this way about. I tend to like just directors like James Wan and I'm gonna fail all their names, but Nolan, Edgar Wright. I tend to like filmmakers like that. I like Ryan Coogler. I think he's a very good filmmaker. I loved Creed. I loved Black Panther. So that's just kind of my take. So no, I get the whole controversial opinion thing. Probably my most controversial is Logan. I hated the movie. I thought it was yeah, I hated it. I called it on my website. I called it a ball of crap. I thought not necessarily. For one thing, I thought the performances were awful. Hugh Jackman. The reason is specifically because it's an X-Men film. If it had just been a movie about a guy with his creepy dad and they're trying to get through somewhere to safety because they're being chased, I probably would have been okay with it. But because it was an X-Men film, it didn't respect the franchise it came from. And I found that very offensive. And what's funny is I seem to be the only X-Men film fan who has this opinion. I've argued with it. I actually know a comic book artist who does not work for Marvel but is a fan of Marvel, and she and I got into a very heated debate over Logan, and I just basically said I thought it was a horrible film, and she says, but you admit if it wasn't about Logan you would have liked it. I said probably, but it was about Logan, so I hated it. I honestly feel it was because Jess Mangold, he was supposed to make Blood Meridian, which is for those of you unfamiliar with film lore, it's kind of like this movie script that's been passed from director to director. It's based on a book by oh man, his name's gonna escape me, but the same guy who wrote The Road and No Country for Old Men.
Cormac McCarthy.
Yes. And it keeps getting stuck in development limbo. And Jess Mangold was supposed to make the film adaptation, and I really felt like what he did was he just took he took Blood Meridian and turned it into Logan because the studio wouldn't pay for him to make Blood Meridian, and because that's really what it felt like, was that kind of film. It didn't really feel like because someone told me it transcended superhero films. Like, films don't transcend. I mean, maybe like some rare ones like The Godfather, but films don't transcend. That's not a thing. And so they're either in their genre or they're not, and so you can't transcend a genre. So that was kind of why my take. But yeah, I called it a pile of crap on my website. Made a lot of people angry. But I don't care. I rewatched it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I was just mad because of my reaction in the movie there. I rewatched it and I had the same opinion. I was like, but that's just my. That's probably my most controversial take on a film.
I mean, I gotta say, you're very good at going for a very long time, because I was gonna say something about Rian Johnson in The Last Jedi about 10 minutes ago.
Oh, I apologize.
No, it's great. That was a great solid 10-minute rant. There was a nice black bar on my my recorder where you nonstop. No, it's. I mean, in terms of Logan, I would say it's definitely a film that feels like it's trying to. I would disagree with your point that film can't transcend, but I could see someone seeing that and looking at it and finding it extremely pretentious and out of line with the rest of the franchise. Although the X-Men franchise as a whole is rather offbeat compared to modern superhero movies now, so I'm not quite as I would not consider that sacrilege as some of the people would.
It's very hit and miss. Now, I've never seen the Deadpool films, and I haven't seen Dark Phoenix yet, so
Don't!
I can't. So, no.
I saw it. It's terrible.
Well, see, I had one of my I called it my all-star guest. She wrote a movie review, and she kind of gave it a moderate movie review. She basically said it's not as bad as people say it is, but it's not the best. So go read her review again on my website. But it's like, so I really can't say anything. I always withhold. Like, if you want to ask me about what I thought about the trailer, that's fine. But I always like to at least see the movie before I say, oh, it's a pile of crap. The one exception I made was Roman. I fell asleep during the trailer of Roma. I fell asleep during the trailer of Roma, and so I'm like, this movie's probably terrible. So
I dug it, but apparently I'm a pretentious snob, so.
Well, I don't think you're a pretentious snob for liking it. It's just like, it just didn't interest me. Like, it's black and white. Great, a lot of movies are black and white. You know, what does that matter? I guess because now most movies are in color. Okay, well, they used to not be in color, so, The Artist, it's in black and white. It's a fantastic film. So, in my opinion.
With that film, I would say it's not the color that necessarily matter. I would say it's just it's trying to go for a very specific style of, like, I forget what the term is, like, neorealist style of film, where it wants to be this, like, very grounded story about average people and living average lives and trying to make something around that. And that kind of thing just doesn't go for everyone, so I get that would be frustrating. I mean, honestly, I don't mind people having vastly contrarian opinions on films. I just don't like it when these debates turn, like, excessively hostile with, like, the way The Last Jedi one did. I mean, with me, that movie, I noticed that there's a lot of really good film criticism about it from both sides of people who like it and who dislike it. But I find that so much of the best stuff is just tempered by the fact that the best minds on it they just treat each other like absolute crap. Like if you watch, like, Patrick H. Willems or Dishonored Wolf, they have very, very different opinions on the movie, and they just spit bile at each other in the most ugly way, and I'm like, that's not fun. I don't want to, like, I like the movie and I could defend it, but if I want to try to convince someone that they should like the movie, and I send them a video of a guy just spitting bile at people who don't like it, then that's not useful. And there's so many people that they just get so emotionally invested in in their opinion on, especially really controversial films, and it just bugs me at times.
Well, there is one defense of The Last Jedi that I will give, is that I'm a fan of the Star Wars prequels. I will argue all day about how I think those movies are good. And what's interesting is now The Last Jedi caused such a divide that the people who don't like it are actually starting to revisit the prequels. And so I think that that's fantastic, because I'm like, hey, if we have, like I said, I didn't like The Last Jedi, but like you said, I'm fine if someone wants to defend it. I'll be happy to go back and forth on that. Whatever. Like you said, we don't have to spit bile or whatever. But I do love the fact that the people who agree with me a little bit, who didn't like it, but also didn't like the prequels before The Last Jedi, now they're liking the prequels because they're like, oh, well, I just remembered the prequels are connected to the Clone Wars, which is, the animated series. So, it takes place in between Attack of the Clones is right before the Clone Wars and right before Revenge of the Sith. I mean, it's fantastic. So I love that now is kind of starting to pop up in the debate, where everyone's forgetting that Red Letter Media ever did those bizarre movie reviews of them,
Yeah, I've seen those. I mean, I'm simultaneously of the opinion that they're bad movies and that I like all of them, so.
See, I have a friend who told me that. She's like, I think they're bad Star Wars films, but I kind of like them. It's like, yeah.
But
I've heard that before.
The number one thing they get absolutely right is that they get the world building just immaculate. They make the Star Wars universe feel like it's a place that's constantly evolving and constantly changing with just in the background of the films. So even if the movies themselves are kind of dull, it feels there's a lot of other people that can like take that setting and tell other stories in it, like the Clone Wars, that just feel a lot more lived in and a lot more alive. But the funny thing is with the sequel trilogy, the problems it has is directly inverse of all of the problems of the prequels. Where the new ones, they have no politics, they have no world building, they have significantly more defined characters, but they aren't running around in a world that makes them feel like there's any weight to what they're doing.
See, I would disagree. I think the characters in the prequel are much stronger than the new characters in the sequel series. I don't think the characters are developed that well. I mean, Rey, not in The Force Awakens, but certainly in The Last Jedi, she's kind of a Mary Sue, and I feel like, you know, she doesn't, every power up she gets, she doesn't really earn. And so that's why I kind of feel like, you know, it's not like Luke, who went through all these trials to get to where he's at, and also too, they totally ruined Luke. You know, it's kind of suffers from the same thing Logan does, in my opinion. They didn't respect the franchise that it came from in that sense. But, you know, I would say, or on the other hand, in the prequels you have Anakin, and say what you want to about the performance of Hayden Christensen, I felt like the arc that he was on was very well developed. Same with Obi-Wan. I felt like that the prequel series did respect an established franchise character and gave him a good a continuation of the arc, even retroactively.
I mean, I would say the elements for the prequels are fine. I like all the actors in it, obviously, because the casting is just spectacular in those movies. But I would say that if anything, I would want a lot of them to come back to get their own movies, just because I think most of them deserve to be in a higher class of movie or something that's just dedicated to them, especially Ewan McGregor, who's just the most dedicated guy to it. And he's going through his own little resurgence at the moment too, with Dr. Sleep. The trailer just came out for that, and
that looks amazing.
He's been in a lot of stuff. I mean, in terms of the characters from the new series, I would just say that I think that they're kind of just they're specifically trying to be these like very broad pulp characters. And I've never particularly it's never bothered me that Rey is extremely powerful, because they seem to be trying to make that part of the story slightly, and just in the sense that what happens to someone who just happens to wake up one day and just suddenly realize they're the most powerful person in the universe, called forth by the Force to single-handedly resolve something. And I think there's at least a story idea there. Although I would take the controversial opinion that I think J.J. Abrams probably did not set up the story they wanted to tell particularly well. I mean, I would say I'm more frustrated by Force Awakens than The Last Jedi.
See, that I've heard this as well. People were that it's the opposite. My thing is J.J. Abrams, his style of filmmaking. You know, he calls it mystery boxes, right? But here's the thing: when you're not directing the sequel to answer those mysteries, you end up with a mess. So, and here's another thing that I thought worked really well with the prequels. Now, some people disagree with me on this. George Lucas at least had a plan. He knew where he was going. Even if he didn't have everything squared away, he had an outline of, okay, I'm going to start with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi finding Anakin Skywalker, and I'm going to end with Darth Vader. So he at least had point A and point C, and even if he had some trouble at point B, there at least was a plan. And maybe this happened because Colin Trevorrow left, or was fired or kicked out, or however you want to say it.
I think he was fired because he made Book of Henry, and they realized they had the worst director in the world in their staff.
That's Zack Snyder. But no, I see what you're. I'm just kidding. But I see your point. But I think that Kathleen Kennedy got a little conceited that I'm working for Disney and I'm running Lucasfilms, and we can just throw this in together with three different scripts, and we'll just kind of make it work. And I think that that was kind of a mistake. They should have at least had, even if they weren't sure about J.J. Abrams, they should have had someone more familiar with the franchise, who didn't just watch it once when they were kids, and to help them plan it out. They should have had someone from Lucasfilms. And there were offers, not just from George Lucas. Other franchise veterans were offering to step in, and of course Gareth Edwards utilized that, and we got Rogue One, which is probably the only, in my opinion, the only good film. Now I know it went through an editing process and blah 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 blah, but the point is Rogue One, I think, in my opinion, is the best of the newer generation of films. So I think that them stepping into it without a plan, I think that had a little bit to do with it.
I think Kathleen Kennedy comes from the older school of film, because she was Steven Spielberg's producer for her entire adolescence and youth, and I think she was going at the trilogy from a kind of take it one by one and try to see what happens with them and see what the reaction is. So I'm not exactly sure about that, because I know that they did cram the schedules to them very tightly, so there wouldn't have been that much room to actually do much responding in it, which is kind of my worry with the Rise of the Skywalker, is that they're going to try to respond to criticisms and it's going to feel like a very rushed film. But I think that just her attitude doesn't really fit with that newer style of like making movies on a fast lane that's so common nowadays. And I can see that although I don't necessarily think that she's the worst voice for it, because I know that when they were first handing over Lucasfilm, apparently she was George Lucas's first pick. So it's not so apparently there was at least some thought into why she should take over the studio. And obviously there's a lot to say about just how she's like a knee-jerk feminist on a lot of stuff and like that. But I mean, I think Abrams is just as culpable of that as anyone else. So.
Well, sure, but see, that's the problem though. When you have a guy who is known for remakes and mystery boxes, and then you hand it off to a guy who thinks he's an auteur, then you're going to have problems. So, what did Rian Johnson do with all these mysteries that J.J. Abrams passed off? He said they don't matter. So, this is actually one thing I do like about The Last Jedi was when Kylo Ren tells her parents were nobodies. I actually liked that twist. I actually thought that was a great twist, because everyone in the Star Wars universe is from someone important. So it's like, oh, this is great. This actually to me, this cures her Mary Sue. That's a big complaint I have about her. She's a Mary Sue. But this actually cures that. She's a nobody, kind of like Rocky, and now she's rising up to be this, the most powerful Jedi or Skywalker probably in the future that we've ever seen. I'm like, this actually helps her character, and then of course the things with, and there's some spoilers in the statement, but who is Snoke? Let's just kill him off. Who are the Knights of Ren? We don't care. It's kind of like Rian Johnson I think that wasn't specifically Rian Johnson's fault. I think he came to J.J. Abrams and he says, how do you want me to answer these questions? And Abrams said, don't. And so that's what kind of led to some of those faux pas. But I will say, I do think the twist of Rey being a nobody, I think that was actually a really good twist. But now, obviously, in the next film, they're going to retcon it. They've basically said they're going to retcon it. And I think even Rian Johnson said, when Kylo Ren said that, he believed it, but it's not necessarily the case. And it's like, dude, you're willing to defend your awful Luke Skywalker story arc, at least defend your plot twist on Rey. That was the best part of the film, I thought. Was like, yes, we got someone who's not important who can become important. But that's just again, that's just my take on it.
I'm not exactly sure that it would have paid off had J.J. Abrams directed all three of the films. I mean, I don't know that either. I've seen Star Trek Into Darkness. I don't think the guy has that serious of a pretension to expanding a story out in a way that would have been ultimately satisfying beyond just the action spectacle of it, like The Force Awakens.
I'm not even saying that he had to direct all three, but there needed to be some sort of overarch accountability for how the story is going to play out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the logic that went into Rian Johnson saying that none of the mysteries mattered, at least for the middle chapter. So I think something like the Knights of Ren they're probably going to retcon Snoke as like Palpatine's assistant or something like that, and just reveal that in the final film. But I think a lot of the point of the Episode 8 was just trying to address the overarching the entire arc of the series. Like you said, that they actually addressed the prequels, which is, I think, something really good that they did, because I thought that movie had the responsibility to address every single unit in the franchise up to that point, and that meant it had to at least reference the plot of the prequels and find some way to carry it forth. And I thought that was really smart that they did it in just one sentence. If the Jedi sucked, they sucked back then, but which is at least an interesting take on it, just the idea that they were just completely deluded and they didn't know how to handle the idea of a prophet coming in and completely tearing up their order. But at least with The Last Jedi, at least I think part of the lack of answers was part of the point of the film, where it was just the whole point of it was to get these characters in a worse place than when they started, but make them in a place where they could go into the final film prepared to take on the task of having to deal with an empire that's run by a brat. Which I think Kylo Ren is ultimately a more compelling leader of the Empire than Snoke is, based on the characterization we got him in the first film.
Yeah, but not in The Force Awakens, because they kind of take what was compelling about him in The Force Awakens, like, the whole helmet, I'm the ultimate Vader fanboy, and what do? They mock it. And so, that's again my point, where there's no one really watching the continuity of this thing. And
I do like that great lecture from Snoke where he chastises Kylo for losing to someone who's never fought in a lightsaber fight.
Yeah, that was funny. Yeah.
Which I think I think there's at least some. Obviously, Rian Johnson was playing pretty fast and loose with the plot, which is I know is a lot of people's concern with him. I think he tends to be more of an old school moralist than he does as a rigorous, like, attention to detail guy in terms of the way, like, people tend to engage with science fiction.
That's kind of that wannabe auteur thing. I'm gonna use a French word to describe my filmmaking. That's what they do. They think, oh, I know my craft, so that I can just do whatever I want to with this. And it's kind of an arrogance and, again, a disrespect for the franchise. I mean, you see how he has interacted with fans and who have expressed his concerns, and all he really has to say is, "Hey, listen, I'm going to stand by my work. And it's a good deal." But no, he's like Zack Snyder. He's going to ridicule fans who attack him, and it's like, these are your customers. Establish good customer relations. Defend your film, but not in a way that's insulting.
I mean, I credit where it's due. At the very least, he's not going after Abrams for changing any of the things he changed. So.
Right, that is true, but I think he has a respect. And my understanding was Abrams handpicked Johnson, didn't he, to direct the middle one?
He might have. I'm really curious how this is going to fit together as like a trilogy once the scar of this franchise is healed. So 10 years from now, when we're in the middle of the KOTOR trilogy, and we're all just being like, man, new Star Wars is bad. I miss old Star Wars. The Last Jedi was the best now.
Right.
It'll be like the prequels now.
Yeah, exactly. It's going to be, and that's goes back to what I was saying earlier, right? To my dad, Roger Moore was the best James Bond, but to his older brother, Sean Connery is the best James Bond. So it goes back to that. My generation was always the best, even the movies that were terrible.
What are your thoughts on the Game of Thrones guys doing the next trilogy?
I actually have not watched a single episode of Game of Thrones, not because I don't like it, but because I don't have an HBO account.
Well, that's the first problem.
Right, so I actually don't know. I can only go by what people are telling me. I know one of my friends is super excited. He can't wait. And then one of my other friends is like, oh, man, not Star Wars. So, but my understanding is they're really good when they have a map. So, like, the first... how many seasons did it run?
8. The first 4 were spectacular. It tapered off 5, 6, and then everyone got mad at 7, 8. So. Right.
Okay. So when they had a guide, e.g., the books, the series was fantastic. It's when they didn't have anything to go on that this is what fans are telling me. It's when the books ended and they didn't know what to do, and they kind of had a falling out, I believe, with George R.R. Martin. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's true. But that's when it kind of started to go off the rails a little bit. But so with Star Wars, you've got plenty of material to work with. So if they go back to the old expanded universe, or even find something in the new canon, and they use that as a guide to make their trilogy, I could actually see the argument that it's going to be good.
The prominent rumor at the moment is that they're going to be doing an adaptation of Knights of the Old Republic, which
that would be fantastic.
Yeah, so there's a rich universe, like 3 whole games to work with. And apparently they just brought on the screenwriter of Battle Angel to write the first one at least. So, and they also wrote Avatar and a couple other films. So he's pretty good at like just blanket sci-fi screenwriting. So they'll probably have something pretty solid overall.
I have to admit, I'm a little confused on why. Now I know he's busy with the Mandalorian, but I wonder why. Part of me is confused why they're not bringing in Jon Favreau to help with it. But I'm sure it's just because they want to keep the movies and the television separate a little bit, which is fine. But I would, because he obviously, from what we've seen coming out about the Mandalorian, it looks like it's going to be fantastic. So I am curious, but like I said, they probably just wanted to keep it separate. You don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. But if they are doing the Knights of the Old Republic and they do it well, that's going to be a killer new generation of Star Wars films, because I didn't really care for the games, but I read the books. There's a whole bunch of Knights of the Old Republic books, and Darth Bane, and all of these other amazing characters. I think it could be. I think it could be pretty awesome. See, I didn't hear that, so this is news to me. Now I'm excited. But that would be really a good, rich well to pull from.
Yeah, especially for fans that are feeling very alienated at the moment by the new stuff. And there's so many just science fiction fans that are just completely frustrated by the state of Star Wars, the state of Star Trek, the state of Doctor Who. They're just like, I have nowhere to go! And I think that just having that in the future kind of it might be worth putting a little hope in people, because I don't like being around movie fans that are just completely apoplectic about just the state of movie making. We're like, everything is gone, everything is ruined.
I agree. I'm like, just go watch a movie. I mean, there's more than just, and I know for me as a science fiction fan to say this, there's more than just science fiction out there. Just go watch The Highwayman. It's a great film. Go watch Hell or High Water.
Go watch Death of Stalin.
Yeah, exactly. Go watch something else until something else comes along. Now I'm in the first season of Star Trek Discovery. I managed to get a hold of a CBS Online subscription, and I'm in the middle of Discovery Season 1. I'm not getting a lot of the hate it's getting, other than some of the timelines stuff I understand, and some of the new stuff about Spock's father and whatnot. But I'm not really seeing the downside to it. I don't feel like a few of my conservative sci-fi fans were saying the series was overly political. I am not getting that impression at all. This is someone who didn't really like Deep Space Nine because it was that one was overtly political. So it's, but I'm excited for season 2. There's this guy I know through, I don't think we've ever spoken in person, but I know through Twitter, and he's a big Star Trek nut like I am, and he hated Discovery season 1, but loved season 2. So I'm and he and I tend to agree on the same films, again, with the exception of Logan. He loved Logan, I hated it, like I said before, but so I'm kind of excited to get on to season 2, because I hear they really did Christopher Pike justice in that season. So we'll have to wait and see.
I actually kind of like Discovery too. I mean, the first season definitely plays fast and loose with the continuity. I don't think it exactly fits in. I mean, I'd have a hard time imagining that this takes place 10 years before TOS. Because TOS feels like such a chill timeline where, like, nothing bad has happened. Like, everything, it feels like all the bad stuff that happened in that timeline happened decades before. And, like, especially when you meet the Klingons, they're just like, we went to war once, but we might go to war again if you get these tribbles out of here. But, I mean, like, that's kind of how I got the sense of it. So, I just kind of approached Star Trek Discovery as its own thing. I wasn't super enthusiastic about the main character, but I love just about every side character, especially the captain.
Jason Isaacs is great as Lorca.
I don't like what ultimately happens to him. I think it's kind of lame because it ends up writing. It doesn't quite do justice to what I was considering the best character in the show. But I mean, up until that point, he's so compelling and complicated, and I was so into it. So I'll get around to watching season 2 when my library stocks the DVDs. But
makes sense, and I really feel like it's a lesson learned, because the fans kind of reacted poorly to Star Trek Discovery. So what they did a turnabout for season 2, and now, as far as I know, they're not saying it's the best show ever, but they're saying, hey, we actually kind of like season 2. That's the general feeling I'm getting. So and see, that's what I feel like. like with Captain Marvel, the big mistake the filmmakers did was when Brie Larson was out doing her grandstanding, instead of doing what Ryan Coogler did and saying, "Hey, yeah, my film is for the African American community," but he never said, "I don't want white people to see this film," right? He said, "I want everyone to see this film. It's Black Panther. I want everyone to appreciate it." Right, exactly.
The benefit of Black Panther is that it ultimately comes to the conclusion that a worldwide race war would be a bad thing. So
yeah, exactly. So, but Captain Marvel, they doubled down on Brie Larson's kind of grandstanding, and I think that's real. So I really feel like people judge that film based on that, on her attitude more than the merits of the film itself. Now, but the rumor is there is a Captain Marvel cut of Avengers Endgame where she's a more prominent character. Now I don't know if that's true, but that's a rumor going around. But because fans kind of reacted poorly to her, they filmed a second version where her total screen time is about 20 minutes, maybe out of a 3-hour film. So I don't know if that's true or not. That's what I've heard. That's kind of the rumor. Brie Larson has kind of dropped hints that it could be true. And I think even Scarlett Johansson said that she was supposed to be in a couple of other scenes. So I think that was the Russo brothers, who are actually good filmmakers. They're like, "Oh, Brie Larson's kind of a divisive figure. Let's cut her out of our film because we want people to like this movie." So they.
Two problems with that. One, Captain Marvel, it was controversial, but it did an enormous amount at the box office.
Yeah,
and then
first week, yes.
And the Russo brothers didn't stop them for throwing in the girl power stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, that's
by our screensaver of every female character at once.
And this was another thing I've been controversial for. That scene, spoiler alert, didn't really bother me that much because it was a callback to an Avengers title called the
A-Force?
Huh?
Was it A-Force or?
No, well, that was later. There's an earlier one in the 80s, I think, called the Fighting Valkyries. And it had a lot of that generation Avengers, so including Mantis. I believe Mantis was a member of that team. So it was kind of a callback to that. So when I saw that scene, I didn't think girl power until later. I thought, oh, that was a girl power moment. I thought, oh, what a great comic book reference, being the nerd that I am. So that was kind of my initial reaction to that scene.
I was gonna say on the whole nerds not liking things with Star Trek, half the fans just went over and started watching the Orville.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. I haven't seen it yet. I hear it's really funny.
The first season is, I thought it was gonna be really cheap, but it ended up being spectacular. We are rolling again.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I just had another CPU error because my computer is ancient. So, but I was just saying, with all the fans all these fans that are mad about Captain Marvel, they just go over to watch stuff like the Orville. And you were saying you hadn't seen that yet, though.
No, not yet. I'm not a huge Seth MacFarlane fan, but I do like him sometimes. It's one of those things, I'm not a big Family Guy fan. I have seen it. I have watched his O.J. Simpson episode. Should have won an award. It probably did. That was probably one of the, at the time, it was probably the funniest thing on TV. Was just that one episode was fantastic.
And I was saying the thing I like about MacFarlane is just that fact that he's no less political than everyone else, but he does a really good job explaining his opinions, so it never feels like he's just browbeating you. Back when he did the gay marriage and marijuana and atheism episodes of Family Guy, it always felt like he was the outsider having to explain to the then conservative culture why he should be the way he was. It never just felt like browbeating now where you have to like something, otherwise you're wrong. Which is the tenor you get out of something like Ghostbusters that turns a lot of fans off.
I haven't seen the remake. Most everyone I talk to say don't bother.
I called it mediocre when it came out. I said it's perfect for this conversation because if you need it to be good to validate your opinion, it's okay enough that you can say it's good. But if you want to say you hate it, it's bad enough that you can say you hate it. So it was just it's just the perfect middle ground, and then no one remembered it after a week. So it just went away. It wasn't like Wonder Woman where there was actually a pretty good movie there you could talk about, and there wasn't any sort, and like after that everyone's like, oh cool, Wonder Woman's pretty good.
I feel like that way about what you said about the Ghostbusters remake. That's what people were saying about Captain America: Civil War. It was just good enough where if you liked it, you could explain why it was good, but if you didn't like it, it was just bad enough where you could explain why you hated it. So
I noticed that a lot with the larger Russo brother movies, that they tend to get that they're unwieldy to the point where it's easy to go and get very frustrated with them. Like I was not totally on board with the Endgame bandwagon when it came out, so I said it was like a 7 out of 10, which is like just heresy to some people, I'm sure. But obviously movies, they're very good directors. They're directing things that are almost impossible to direct. So.
Well, they managed to pull them off. And my biggest gripe with Civil War was that it should have been called Avengers Civil War. It was not a Captain America movie.
I mean, the only problem with that was it wouldn't have felt like the other Avengers movies tonally. I mean, it's
right.
Joss Whedon movies are so colorful, and there's so many characters. In Civil War, it's really just Captain America and Iron Man getting angry at each other in a parking lot. So. I mean,
sure.
Have you seen that famous video of color grading in the Marvel Universe?
No, I have not.
I'll shoot it to you. There's a very good movie video essay on the way the movies are, like, they do the color scheming in those movies, and a slight adjustment and the movies look like infinitely better, but the way they're shot, they make them look like these just empty parking lots just because they think that that's the way it looks the best for like fans. When I mean, they haven't done that as much lately. A couple of their movies have been a lot more vibrant, like Guardians and Infinity War especially was just beautiful to look at. But there was a period where a lot of their movies were really like flat, colorful, like from a color perspective.
Yeah, I can see that, and that you're right about Joss Whedon. I really feel bad for him because he has really lost his touch. And now I will defend Age of Ultron. I thought it was a good film, but you can tell from trailer 1 to trailer 2, the movie was recut. If you watch the first Avengers Age of Ultron trailer, it's super creepy, super dark, and then you watch the second one, and it's more like the first film's trailer. And I was like, this is kind of weird. And at the time, I was going, this is kind of weird because I was just getting into marketing. So I was like, this is kind of a weird marketing thing. One trailer sets a certain tone, and then the second one completely contradicts that tone. I thought that was kind of weird. And then when the movie came out, it was more like the first Avengers, tonal-wise, I mean. And, more funny, more side humor. I've heard rumors that the cast didn't like how the film was going, and so they fought with Whedon through the whole process. And that's never a good. I don't know if that's true. No one can really confirm that. But I've heard that Robert Downey Jr. didn't like that Iron Man was the creator of Ultron, and he really fought with Whedon over that. And I heard that Scarlett Johansson didn't like Black Widow's arc. Which I actually thought it was good because it took a character who you didn't really know about and kind of showed her more vulnerable side. But I know that's a lot of criticism people give of the film.
I like it too.
But she didn't like that. Yeah, there you go. So that I don't know if that's true. Again, these are all rumors that you read off Reddit, right? So I don't know if that's true, but that's what I heard was they just fought with him over how the actors fought with him about how the movie should be made.
The thing that annoys me about Age of Ultron is that it's so... like, when you go back and look at the first interviews after Avengers, it's so at odds with what the movie clearly was that he wanted to direct. He wanted to do a smaller film than Avengers that was a lot darker, and you kind of see that in that first trailer where...
Right.
Like, the concept should have been the Avengers deal with an actual, like, scary threat. Like, Loki's a funny threat. Like, they should have dealt with, like, an actual, like, unflinchingly scary threat, like an actual AI that is no holds bar, wants to kill them, and will do anything it can to kill them. And it should have been about... by the end of that film, they should have been where they were by the end of Civil War or Infinity War, where the team is just completely scattered and and frustrated with each other. because it took 3 films to ultimately get to the point where they really should have got to the middle point of that trilogy, which was something bad happens and it makes the entire team break up.
Right. Yeah, and that's true. And there's also, you can tell that that Joss Whedon didn't talk to the director of Iron Man 3, because Iron Man is kind of in the same place he is in the first Avengers, like right after, than he is in Iron Man 3. And but in Captain America: Civil War, the Russo brothers continue that Iron Man 3 arc where he's become a lot more humble. He's faced personal tragedy, got almost blown up by a terrorist and lived, and so he's a lot more war torn and whatnot. So you can kind of see why it didn't feel like a natural progression from Iron Man 3 to Age of Ultron. It was directly from Avengers to Avengers Age of Ultron for his arc in particular.
Well, Tony Stark's arc completely changes between Iron Man 3 and Age of Ultron. His first 4 movies appearance, it feels like a self-contained Iron Man story of guy goes through trauma, becomes a better person, goes through alcoholism, overcomes that, has to learn how to become sacrificial, it becomes traumatized, and ultimately it gets to the point in his life where he can start moving on. And from that point on, the movies are all about Tony Stark eagerly trying to move on with his life and failing and making horrible mistakes in the process that make the situations around him worse. Like, Ultron is, I want to retire, so I'm going to create something that can handle the world for me. And in his hubris, he doesn't realize that doing so is the most, like, unethical and poorly thought out thing in the world. And
right.
So he tries to join the government to the Avengers, and that ends up backfiring, and just right up until the end of Endgame, like, every decision he makes from beginning of Age of Ultron on ends up being a bad decision. Except
right.
for the one to marry Pepper. That ends up being the only good thing, because he ends up having a daughter and a family and moving on slightly. But which honestly ends up being one of the most interesting things in Endgame. But in the end, he ultimately makes another bad decision that gets him killed in a weird way. But it's right for the overall story for him to sacrifice himself. But now his daughter doesn't have a dad, so oops.
Yeah, and that was his point, right? That was one of the reasons why he didn't want to be sacrificial in the beginning. So.
Well, yeah, he's the normal guy Avenger, sort of. Well,
right.
Normal guy Elon Musk.
He built a suit. Yeah, exactly. He built a suit. Hawkeye and Black Widow are super spies. Thor is an alien from outer space. Captain America is an enhanced soldier, so on and so forth. He's the only but until Ant-Man, he's kind of the only normal person in the group.
Yeah, I for a while I thought Ant-Man was going to be like a super smart guy compared to everyone else, but apparently he's just an IT guy, which works just fine, because they just end up getting played off as the dumb Avenger for most of the series. Then
makes sense, yeah.
You know who I don't think. The one character who I think the Russo brothers universally got wrong, I think they got Hawkeye terribly wrong, starting after Age of Ultron.
See, I don't necessarily think they got him wrong. I feel like he was underused.
Well, I think his whole arc with, like, Age of Ultron just, the foreshadowing screams, Hawkeye is gonna die, Hawkeye is gonna die, Hawkeye is gonna die. We set up the nicest, most sympathetic reason for you to not want him to die, and he is ultimately going to do that. And every movie after that, he's irresponsible, he abandons his family to go help the Avengers, and gets arrested for it. Then his family dies, and he proceeds to turn into Charles Bronson and murder his way through the entire third world. And by the end of Endgame, there's no redemption to it. He hasn't made it. The only sacrifice he has to make is to let his best friend kill herself, which isn't a decision he makes. It's Scarlett Johansson throwing herself off the cliff.
Well, he did try to stop her. He wanted to make that mistake. He wanted to make that choice, though. I mean,
maybe that's just me, but if there were any moment in the series for Hawkeye to have that, like, moment of sacrifice, it would have been in Endgame, where he's forced to, like, to deal with the fact that he became a murderer, and that he's the only person that doesn't have a life going forward in order to handle this, because now every government in the world is going to want to hunt him down. But, I mean, and that would just be just me. I think that, I don't know why they chose Black Widow as the one to sacrifice.
Well, I think that goes back to Whedon, because Whedon is kind of known for killing off characters that you love. And so I think they were maybe trying to echo that as, besides...
But he was setting up Hawkeye!
Yes, he was, but they ignored that, because they... See, this goes back to the rumor. There's a rumor that in the original cut, it was Hawkeye who dies. So I don't know if that's I don't know if that's true. But it seems like some test art was released where it looks like he is doing the complete fall, and Nat is still hanging on. So from the what do they call it, the storyboards. So at one point he was considered the one, but they said the reason they picked her was because in their minds, she's the most heroic Avenger, out of all of them. And so it made sense for her to be the one to sacrifice herself. So,
I guess, but then you could have kept her alive and actually fulfilled the whole Hulk romance story arc. I feel like you would have gotten more done had it been Hawkeye, because then he gets a cathartic ending that answers all of the foreshadowing up to that point. Hulk and Black Widow finally get to meet up again and kind of resolve their story, which doesn't happen. Like, they hang out again, but apparently they don't get back together despite being in the same room for a while. Which I don't quite get why that never got resolved, but now Hulk is permanently Professor Hulk, so who knows where that's gonna go.
Well, apparently there is a Disney Plus Hulk series in the works, so maybe we'll find out.
I know there's a Hawkeye series, which they're probably gonna do is do the whole comic. His daughter becomes the new Hawkeye thing, which that probably makes sense. I mean, you could just see in Endgame that that so many of their ideas are just going to be turned, like the ending states for all those characters are going to get turned into television shows.
Yeah, for sure. Or at least the midquels that they wanted to do but never could.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the first one is Captain America it was Falcon and the Falcon and Bucky, but now it's going to be Captain America and Bucky, I guess, which I am super fascinated by, but also super worried about, because I don't know what they're going to do with it. I'm worried they're going to go with the Nick Spencer stuff and it's going to get super political.
Yeah.
I mean, you're aware of all that, right?
Oh yeah, in Marvel Comics, when I heard that Falcon was going to become Captain America, that actually didn't bother me, because to me it was kind of like he's been Captain America, one of Captain America's wards since the 70s. And so it's kind of like, oh, well, are you going to disagree with Nightwing becoming Batman? They just picked with Bucky because he's the most well-known. But then they got a really bad writer to do his story arcs. And I remember they did a comic called Rage of Ultron, I think. It came out around the same time as Age of Ultron.
I like Age of Ultron.
Right. But there's this really dumb monologue between Vision, Ant-Man, and Hank Pym Ant-Man, and Falcon, Captain America. And it's like he's supposed to be the leader of the Avengers, but he won't stop Vision and Ant-Man from having this existential conversation on what constitutes a soul. I'm like, dude, you're in the middle of Ultron killing everyone. It's time to tell them to suit up and move out. I mean, but instead he interjects with his own thoughts. And I'm like, dude, this isn't the time for that. Be a leader. And so I always thought that it's such a shame, because he would have made such a good Captain America, but I always felt he got crappy writers during that. I think it was called Marvel Now, during that Marvel Now timeline.
Yeah, the infinite series of reboots at Marvel Comics. Hey, guess what? It's a new year. Time for new number ones for everything. That was when I was still a voracious comic reader, and every single year, brand new number ones.
And that's right back to the old numbering a couple of months later.
I still like comics, but I don't go to the comic book store every week anymore. I mean, just because I got frustrated with the DC reboot, and I got frustrated with the post Secret Wars Marvel, and I got to the point where I was just going there to pick up Superman and Daredevil. So, which I did like the new Superman and the Charles Soule Daredevil series. I don't know if you've read either of those.
I have not. No, I right now I'm being just grossly let down by Tom King's Batman. So,
I see you ranting about that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm so disappointed because he had such a great kickoff, and then around the whole wedding after that, he just fell off. I don't know what happened. I think Heroes in Crisis distracted him too much. Honestly,
was he the one writing that enormous 100 volume Batman series that was?
Well, not anymore. They cut it.
Oh yeah. What? So he's just. So what are they doing with that then? I just fully canceled it or what?
No, it's going to get a new writer after issue 85, but they haven't announced who it's going to be.
Are they changing the story, or are they going to keep going with what? Because they said it's going to get super crazy towards the end.
I don't know, but they released a teaser that he's going to introduce the Phantasm from Mask of the Phantasm.
I saw that.
And I'm like, why? Why are you letting him ruin my childhood further? It's like,
I always thought the Phantasm would just stay in the movies. But...
Well, Harley Quinn, she started out, in the Batman the Animated Series.
Yeah, I mean, this Phantasm always just felt so specific to that one story, though. So I don't.
Yeah. She has another cameo in a Justice League episode, but it's literally like a 10-second cameo. So
that's
just
cool.
She's still a part. She actually is continuity. It was kind of that.
Well, that's cool. I know that most of the old Justice League cartoon was together as one thing, so.
Yeah, it was supposed to be Justice League was supposed to be a continuation of Superman, the animated series, which is it's obvious. I mean, Superman's the main character.
I bought a DVD of that years ago because I'm a huge Superman fan, but I haven't done a deep dive into that yet. I really need to.
It's a good series. I think how they're doing Justice League Unlimited, which is the last 2 seasons of the show, they should have any Transformers animated series should mimic that model where it's Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman are the main characters, mixed in with Green Lantern and Flash, but then have a guest star superhero every episode. I think that makes more sense. I think they should do that with. I'm always like, why aren't the new Transformer television series emulating this? That would have made more sense. Like the Prime series, it cuts it down to 4 or 5 characters. Every once in a while, Jazz will guest star or something like that, just to use fan service. But that model, that old kind of Bruce Timm style of telling animated stories or mature animated stories is kind of going away, and that's a sad thing. I mean, you can see that with Beware the Batman. That was just a god-awful television show.
I mean, they did bring back Bruce Timm for Killing Joke, and that didn't go that well.
That's true. Well, but yes, and that's because they let him give into his weird Batman-Batgirl fetish. I don't know why he has that, but obviously it's in Batman Beyond, right? They basically say that, but yeah, he's had this weird Batman-Batgirl fetish. I don't know what it is, but
it's the age difference that really just ruins it.
You're right. Yeah, exactly. He's old enough to be your father. It's like,
yeah, that is a fetish. You said you needed to go soon, right?
Yeah, I should probably log off soon.
Okay. Do you want to plug all your stuff before you head out, or?
Yeah, sure. So Twitter is @RealJacobAirey. Instagram is RealJacobAirey. My Facebook is Author Jacob Airey. There's more stuff about my book that came out in January that's on there. My blog is, of course, www.jacobairey.blog. It's JACOBAIREY.blog.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tyler. I thought this was a really good conversation.
Yeah, I did too. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
You too. Bye.